Wellness Rhythm Show. Find your rhythm. Live your wellness.
Here's a question that stopped me cold recently. What if we've been thinking about depression backwards? Like, what if the exhaustion, the poor sleep, the appetite changes? What if those aren't just symptoms? What if they're also part of what's keeping people stuck?
Right, and that framing actually has serious clinical backing now. There's a growing body of research suggesting the relationship between depression and the body is genuinely bidirectional. The brain isn't just making the body feel bad, the body is actively feeding information back to the brain.
Which means the physical stuff, movement, sleep, what you eat, those aren't just nice to haves on top of therapy or medication. They may be doing real measurable work.
Exactly. And today we want to talk about what that work actually looks like, because the science here is more specific and more interesting than just exercise more.
So let's start with what we mean when we say depression and the body. Because y'all, I think a lot of people hear that and think, oh, we're just talking about lifestyle stuff, like go for a walk and cheer up.
Which is not what we're saying, not even close. What the research is pointing toward is that depression has significant physiological underpinnings: inflammation, disrupted circadian rhythms, gut-brain signaling. It's not purely a thought disorder.
And that matters because it changes how we approach it. If your body is contributing to your mental state, then taking care of your body isn't separate from mental health treatment. It's part of it.
Right, let's unpack that a bit. One of the most compelling researchers in this space is Dr. Roger McIntyre at the University of Toronto. His work on inflammation and depression shows that elevated inflammatory markers, things like C-reactive protein and interleukin-6, are found in a significant subset of people with depression.
So their immune system is essentially on a low-grade alarm?
That's a really apt way to put it. And here's what's interesting. Lifestyle factors like sedentary behavior, poor sleep, and ultra-processed diets are all known to elevate those same inflammatory markers. So the loop feeds itself.
Okay, so let's talk about movement first, because I think it's the most discussed, but also the most misunderstood. Because telling someone who's depressed to just go exercise is, honestly, kind of cruel without context.
It is. And the research actually agrees with your frustration there. A landmark meta-analysis published in the British Journal of Sports Medicine in 2023, covering over 120,000 participants, found that exercise was 1.5 times more effective than leading medications or therapy for reducing depression symptoms.
Wait, 1.5 times more effective?
That's what the data showed, led by Ben Singh at the University of South Australia. Now, I want to be careful here. This doesn't mean people should stop medication or therapy. It means movement is a serious clinical tool, not an afterthought.
Here's the thing, though. That finding is only useful if we also talk about the how for people who can barely get out of bed. Because the dose matters, right?
The dose absolutely matters, and the good news is the threshold is lower than most people assume. The same research suggested that even short bouts, think 20 to 30 minutes 3 times a week, showed meaningful benefit. It doesn't require training for a marathon.
And the type of movement matters too. I've read that for depression specifically, activities with a social component or that require some coordination, like dancing or a group class, may have an edge over, say, running alone on a treadmill.
There's support for that, yes. A study from the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health found that even 15 minutes of running or an hour of walking per day was associated with a 26% lower risk of depression. But you're right that group-based or rhythmic activity seems to have added neurological benefits, partly through dopamine and endorphin pathways, but also through social connection, which has its own strong evidence base.
Y'all, if you're finding this useful, please do us a favor and hit like and subscribe wherever you're listening. It genuinely helps us keep doing this, and we have so much more coming.
Appreciated. Right, let's move to sleep, because I think this is where things get particularly vicious in terms of the feedback loop.
Oh, it's brutal. Because depression disrupts sleep, and then poor sleep makes depression worse. And if you're in the sandwich generation, juggling aging parents and your own kids, sleep is already the first thing to go.
Precisely. Matthew Walker, the neuroscientist at UC Berkeley and author of Why We Sleep, describes REM sleep as essentially overnight therapy for emotional processing. When REM is disrupted, the brain loses its ability to regulate negative emotional responses effectively.
So you wake up already behind on emotional processing. That's not a metaphor. That's literally what's happening neurologically.
And the data backs that up. Research published in the Journal of Sleep Research found that insomnia is present in roughly 75% of people experiencing a depressive episode. Treating the sleep doesn't just make people feel more rested, it can actually reduce depression severity.
which is why things like consistent sleep timing, even on weekends, and limiting blue light exposure before bed aren't just sleep hygiene tips. They're doing therapeutic work.
Brilliant point, Emma. And I'll add one nuance. It's not always about more sleep. Irregular sleep patterns, even with sufficient total hours, still disrupt the circadian rhythm. The body runs on timing, not just quantity.
Okay, food. This one's personal for me because I know when I'm struggling, my eating goes sideways first. Either I'm not eating enough or I'm eating everything that makes me feel worse.
And the science validates that completely. The field of nutritional psychiatry has really emerged in the last decade. Professor Felice Jacka at Deakin University in Australia has done some of the most rigorous work here. Her SMILES trial showed that dietary intervention alone produced significant reductions in depression scores compared to social support alone.
So a Mediterranean-style diet, lots of vegetables, whole grains, fish, olive oil, that showed measurable impact on depression symptoms.
It did. The mechanisms are several. Reduced inflammation, improved gut microbiome diversity, and better neurotransmitter precursor availability. About 90% of serotonin, for instance, is produced in the gut, not the brain.
That statistic never stops surprising me. 90%.
Right. And when the gut microbiome is disrupted, which ultra-processed foods do aggressively, that production line is compromised. So it's not about eating perfectly, it's about giving the gut-brain axis something useful to work with.
Here's where I want to push back slightly, though, because I think there's a real equity issue here. Whole foods cost more, time to prepare them costs more. And someone who's depressed and exhausted and maybe working 2 jobs, telling them to eat more salmon and kale can feel incredibly tone-deaf.
That's a completely fair challenge, and I don't want to gloss over it. The research does show that even incremental improvements, more legumes, fewer ultra-processed snacks, produce measurable effects. It doesn't have to be an overhaul, and researchers like Jacka herself have been vocal about the need for food access and policy to be part of the mental health conversation.
Which is exactly right. The individual level stuff is real, but it exists in a system. Both things can be true.
Agreed. And I think that's also where the interconnection between all 3 areas becomes important. It's not do all 3 perfectly or don't bother, it's pick one entry point, make it small. The evidence suggests even one of these areas improved meaningfully starts to shift the others.
Like if you start sleeping a little better, you make marginally better food choices. And then you have just slightly more energy to move, and then that movement helps your sleep.
It's a genuine upward spiral, not just a metaphor. And the research on behavioral activation, which underpins a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy for depression, is essentially a formalized version of that principle.
Okay, if I had to give everyone one thing to walk away with today, it's this. If you or someone you love is dealing with depression, the physical stuff is not a distraction from treatment. It is treatment. Start where you can, even one small thing.
And if I'm adding the research footnote, the most consistently supported starting point across the literature is sleep timing. Fix that first, everything else tends to follow more easily.
Y'all, thank you so much for spending this time with us. We know your time is precious. If this episode gave you something useful, share it with someone who might need it. And please do like and subscribe. It's the best way to keep this show going.
Right, so to summarize the science, your body is not just along for the ride with your mental health. It is, in the most literal neurological sense, co-piloting. Give it something to work with.
Optimistically realistic, as always. See you next time. This show is part of the VoxCrea.ai system. If you want a show like this for your organization without building it yourself,
go to voxcreo.ai and request a sample episode.